My name is Cole, and until 6 months ago I thought I had the perfect life. I'm a 38-year-old mechanic who owns a small auto repair shop in Springfield, Illinois. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps me grounded. My wife Stacey worked as a nurse at Springfield General Hospital, or at least that's what I believed for the past 12 years of our marriage. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there. I was just too trusting, too comfortable in my bubble of domestic bliss to see what was happening right under my nose. It started with small changes. Stacey began working what she called extra shifts at the hospital. "We need the money for the roof repair, honey," she'd say, kissing my forehead as she grabbed her purse. "You know how expensive contractors are these days." And she was right. Our 1950s Colonial had been leaking since the last harsh winter, and the estimates we'd gotten were astronomical. I didn't question it. Why would I? We'd been together since college, married for 12 years, and I trusted her completely. She was the responsible one in our relationship, always thinking ahead, always planning for our future. But then the phone bills started arriving and something felt off. There were dozens of calls to the same unfamiliar number, often lasting hours. When I casually mentioned it to Stacey, she barely looked up from her coffee. "Oh, that's Hunter," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "He's a new attending physician at the hospital. We've been collaborating on some complex cases. You know how it is, medicine doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. Hunter." The name stuck in my mind for reasons I couldn't explain at the time. There was something about the way she said it, too casual, too rehearsed. 3 weeks later, I decided to surprise Stacey with lunch at the hospital. It was a Tuesday and I'd finished an oil change early. I picked up her favorite sandwich from the deli down the street and drove to Springfield General, excited to see her face light up. But when I walked into the emergency department and asked for Stacey Williams at the reception desk, the elderly volunteer looked confused. "Stacey Williams? I don't think we have anyone by that name working here," she said, flipping through a staff directory. My heart stopped. "She's a nurse. She's worked here for 8 years. The woman's expression grew sympathetic. "Sir, I've been volunteering here for 15 years. I know all the nursing staff. There's no Stacey Williams." I stood there holding that sandwich, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The volunteer called over the charge nurse, who confirmed what I already knew but couldn't accept. My wife had never worked at Springfield General Hospital. The drive home was a blur. My hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. If Stacey wasn't working at the hospital, where had she been going every day for the past 8 years? Who was Hunter? And why had she been lying to me all this time? I sat in our driveway for an hour, staring at our house. The house with the leaking roof that we supposedly couldn't afford to fix because we needed every penny. But if Stacey wasn't earning a nurse's salary, how had we been paying our bills? That night, when Stacey came home looking tired and complaining about a difficult surgery, I almost confronted her. The words were right there, burning in my throat. But something held me back. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe some survival instinct told me I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I acted. "How was your day?" I asked instead, my voice sounding strangely normal. "Exhausting," she sighed, kicking off her shoes. "Dr. Matthews had us in surgery for 6 hours straight. Sometimes I wonder why I chose this profession." The lies came so easily to her. She had names, details, entire scenarios crafted to explain away her absences. I wondered how long she'd been practicing this deception. The next morning, after Stacey left for her imaginary job, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through our financial records. What I found made my blood run cold. Our joint checking account, which I rarely looked at because Stacey handled most of our finances, showed regular deposits that were far larger than a nurse's salary should be. And the withdrawals, hundreds of dollars spent at high-end restaurants, luxury hotels, department stores I'd never heard of. There were payments to a rental car company, charges from a spa in Chicago, even what looked like mortgage payments on a property I didn't recognize. My wife was living an entirely separate life, funded by money from sources I couldn't identify. I called in sick to work that day, something I'd done maybe 5 times in my entire career. Instead, I drove to the address where those mysterious mortgage payments were going. It was in Riverside, an exclusive neighborhood on the other side of town where the houses had gates and circular driveways. The address led me to a stunning Tudor-style home with manicured gardens and a fountain in the front yard. I parked across the street and waited, not even sure what I was hoping to see. At 2:30 p.m., Stacey's car pulled into the driveway. I watched my wife, the woman I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, get out of her car and walk to the front door like she owned the place. She didn't knock. She had a key. An hour later, she emerged with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, probably in his mid-40s. They were holding hands and laughing about something. When they reached her car, he pulled her close and kissed her deeply, possessively, like a husband kisses his wife. I felt like I was going to throw up. But I couldn't leave. I had to know more. I followed them at a distance as they drove to an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Through the window, I watched them share an intimate lunch, their heads bent close together in conversation. The man kept reaching across the table to touch her hand, and Stacey was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Radiant, genuinely happy. When they finished lunch, they didn't go their separate ways. They drove back to the Tudor house together, and neither of them came out again that day. I sat in my car until sunset, my mind reeling. This wasn't just an affair. This was a double life so elaborate and sustained that it amounted to bigamy. But who was this man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, who was my wife really? That evening, Stacey came home at her usual time, looking appropriately tired from her fictional day at the hospital. "Sorry I'm late, honey," she said, kissing my cheek. "We had a trauma case that kept us busy." I almost admired the performance. Almost. "How was your day?" she asked, beginning to prepare dinner as if everything was normal. "Fine," I managed to say. "Just routine car repairs." But nothing was routine anymore. That night, as Stacey slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd ever really known the woman I'd married. The next few days were torture. I went through the motions of normal life while conducting a secret investigation into my own wife. I hired a private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Frank Morrison who specialized in marital cases. I felt like a cliché, but I needed professional help to unravel what was clearly a complex web of deception. Frank's first report arrived a week later, and it shattered what was left of my world. The man Stacey was seeing was named Hunter McBride, and he was the CEO of a successful investment firm in Chicago. He was 44, divorced, with 2 teenage children who lived with their mother in California. He'd been renting the Tudor house for the past 3 years as his Springfield residence, spending most of his time there rather than his Chicago penthouse. But here's where it got complicated. According to public records, Hunter McBride had been married to Stacey Williams since 2018. Not Stacey Williams Cole, my wife of 12 years, but simply Stacey Williams. I read the report 3 times before the implications sank in. My wife had married another man 4 years ago. She was a bigamist. But Frank's investigation had uncovered something even more disturbing. The Hunter McBride living in Springfield wasn't the real Hunter McBride at all. The real Hunter McBride was a 67-year-old retiree living in Scottsdale, Arizona. The man my wife had married was actually Carson McBride, Hunter's estranged younger brother who had been using his identity for years in an elaborate con game. Carson had a criminal history dating back 20 years, fraud, identity theft, confidence schemes targeting wealthy women. He would assume his successful brother's identity, court women online or through exclusive social clubs, and manipulate them into marriage or financial arrangements before disappearing with their money. But Stacey was different. Instead of being a victim, she appeared to be his partner. Frank had traced their relationship back 5 years to an online forum for people in the medical field. Stacey had been posing as a traveling nurse, which explained how she could claim to work at different hospitals without anyone checking her credentials. Carson, posing as Hunter, had presented himself as a wealthy widower looking for a second chance at love. Their initial plan, as far as Frank could determine, had been a classic long con. Stacey would maintain her marriage to me as cover while building a relationship with Hunter. Eventually, she would divorce me, marry Hunter, and they would disappear together with whatever money they could extract from both situations. But something had gone wrong. Carson had gotten greedy and started running additional cons on the side. He'd been caught by one of his other victims, and now the FBI was investigating him for wire fraud across multiple states. The house in Riverside? It was scheduled for foreclosure in 6 weeks. The investment firm? It existed only on paper. Even Carson's expensive clothes and car were rented or stolen. My wife had been conned by a con man and she didn't even know it. Frank's report included photographs, financial records, even recordings of phone conversations between Carson and other women he was scamming. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. But the most devastating piece of information came in a supplementary report 2 days later. Stacey was pregnant. Frank had observed her visiting an obstetrician's office and had confirmed the appointment through a contact at the medical practice. She was 12 weeks along. I did the math. The timing meant the baby could be mine or Carson's. Given our intimacy patterns over the past few months, it was probably a 50-50 chance. My wife was carrying a child that might not be mine, with a man who wasn't who he claimed to be, while living a double life funded by criminal activity. I needed a drink. Actually, I needed several drinks. But more than that, I needed a plan. I could confront Stacey immediately, but that would just force her to choose between Carson and me, and I wasn't sure she'd choose me. I could go to the police, but I wasn't certain what crimes had been committed that I could prove. Carson's fraud against other women wasn't my business, and bigamy laws in Illinois were complicated. Instead, I decided to let the situation play out while documenting everything. Frank continued his surveillance, and I began keeping detailed records of Stacey's behavior, our conversations, and our financial transactions. What I discovered over the next month was that my wife was far more calculating than I'd ever imagined. She had been slowly draining our joint accounts to fund her other life. The money she claimed to earn as a nurse was actually coming from cash advances on credit cards she'd opened in both our names. We were $40,000 in debt, and I hadn't known it. She had also been collecting information about my business, my assets, and my personal habits. I found files on our computer with detailed notes about my daily routines, my friends, my financial situation, even my health records. It was like she was building a case against me, documenting everything she would need for a divorce that would leave her with as much of my property as possible. But the most chilling discovery came when I found a handwritten note in her handwriting, hidden in a book she was reading. "C says we need to move faster. Police getting close. Maybe time for Cole's accident." I stared at those words for a long time, trying to convince myself they meant something innocent. But combined with everything else I'd learned, they felt like a death sentence. My wife and her criminal boyfriend were discussing my murder. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going home, I drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town and checked in under a false name. I called in sick to work and spent the next 3 days planning my next move. Frank met me at the hotel with more disturbing news. Carson had been asking questions about me around town, where I worked, what my routines were, whether I had life insurance. He'd even visited my shop, posing as a potential customer, and had asked my employee Jake several casual questions about my schedule. "This guy is planning something," Frank warned me. "You need to be very careful." I realized that confronting Stacey directly would be dangerous. If Carson was as desperate as he appeared, and if they were seriously discussing harming me, then revealing what I knew could trigger them to act immediately. Instead, I decided on a more subtle approach. I would let them think their plan was working while building an airtight case against both of them. Working with Frank and a lawyer he recommended, I began documenting everything. We installed hidden cameras in my house, recorded phone conversations, and traced every financial transaction. I even had Frank hire an undercover operative to approach Carson as a potential victim, just to get him on record discussing his criminal activities. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later when the undercover operative, posing as a wealthy widow, met Carson at an expensive restaurant in Chicago. He was so confident in his abilities that he essentially confessed to his entire operation while trying to impress her. "I've been running this game for 5 years, he bragged, according to the recording. "My current wife thinks she's playing me, but I'm 3 steps ahead. She's got a husband who's worth more dead than alive, if you know what I mean." He went on to describe how he and Stacey planned to stage my death as an accident, collect my life insurance, and disappear to a country without extradition treaties. The recording was enough to convince the FBI to open an investigation. They moved fast, apparently because Carson was already on their radar for multiple other cons. But I still had to deal with Stacey, and I wanted to do it on my terms. I planned the confrontation carefully. I invited Stacey to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Springfield, telling her I wanted to celebrate some good news about the business. She seemed nervous throughout the meal, checking her phone constantly and barely touching her food. "Is everything okay?" I asked, playing the concerned husband perfectly. "Just tired," she said. "It's been a difficult week at the hospital." The hospital she'd never worked at, where she'd never been employed. I nodded sympathetically. "I have something that might cheer you up." I pulled out a small wrapped box and placed it on the table between us. Stacey's eyes lit up with genuine excitement for the first time in months. "Cole, what is this?" "It's not my birthday." "Open it," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. She unwrapped the box carefully, her smile fading as she saw what was inside. It wasn't jewelry. It was a USB drive and a small note that read, "Play me." "What is this?" she asked, but I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. "Why don't you find out?" She looked around the restaurant, perhaps considering making a scene or trying to leave, but I'd chosen our table carefully. We were in a corner, semi-private but visible enough that she couldn't cause a disturbance without drawing attention. Reluctantly, she pulled out her phone and plugged in the USB drive. The first file that opened was a photograph of her and Carson kissing outside the Tudor house. Her face went white. "Keep looking," I said quietly. The next file was a recording of Carson's confession to the undercover FBI operative. As she listened to his voice describing their plan to kill me, I watched her expression change from fear to horror to rage. "He's lying," she whispered. I would never." "Keep listening," I said. The recording continued with Carson describing how Stacey had been researching my habits, how she'd been manipulating our finances, how she'd been feeding him information about my vulnerabilities. By the time the recording ended, tears were streaming down her face. "Cole, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted. "Can you explain why you married another man while you were married to me? Can you explain why our joint accounts are empty? Can you explain why you've been plotting my murder?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, her voice barely audible. "Hunter told me he loved me. He said we could have a life together, but we needed to be careful about the divorce, make sure you didn't take everything." "His name isn't Hunter," I said. "It's Carson McBride and he's a career criminal. The FBI arrested him 2 hours ago." The color drained from her face completely. "What? Everything he told you was a lie. The house, the business, the money, none of it was real. You've been conned, Stacey. Just like you conned me." She stared at me in stunned silence. "But here's what I don't understand," I continued. "Even if you believed he was who he said he was, even if you fell for his lies, how could you plan to have me killed? We've been together for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "I never meant for it to go that far. Carson said it would be quick, painless. He said you'd never know what happened." Hearing her admit it out loud was somehow worse than reading it in Frank's reports. This woman, who I'd loved and trusted completely, had been planning my murder with a casual indifference that was chilling. "The baby," I said. "Is it mine?" She looked up sharply. "How did you? Is it mine?" I repeated. "I don't know," she whispered. "It could be either of you." I nodded slowly. Even now, even caught red-handed, she couldn't tell me the complete truth. "I've filed for divorce," I said, pulling out another envelope. "These are the papers. I'm also pressing charges for fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy to commit murder. The FBI will probably want to talk to you about Carson's other victims." Stacey stared at the divorce papers like they were written in a foreign language. "What about the baby?" she asked. "If it's mine, we'll work out custody arrangements. If it's not, that's between you and Carson. Though I should mention he's probably going to be in federal prison for the next 20 years. I stood up from the table, leaving money for the meal. 12 years, Stacey. We were together for 12 years. I loved you completely, trusted you absolutely, and would have done anything for you. All you had to do was be honest with me. If you'd wanted a divorce, I would have given you one. If you'd needed money, I would have found a way. But instead you chose to lie, cheat, steal, and plan my murder." I looked at her one last time, this stranger wearing my wife's face. "I hope it was worth it." As I walked away, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say. The legal proceedings took months. Carson was convicted on multiple federal charges and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Stacey pleaded guilty to fraud and bigamy and received 3 years probation and community service. The conspiracy charges were dropped in exchange for her testimony against Carson. The baby turned out to be Carson's. Stacey gave birth while I was finalizing the sale of my business in our house. I never saw the child. I moved to Montana, where my uncle owns a ranch. I work as a mechanic in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and secrets don't stay hidden for long. It's a simpler life, and after everything I've been through, simple feels like a luxury. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, scattered throughout our 12-year marriage like breadcrumbs leading to the truth. But I think the real problem wasn't that I was blind to the signs, it was that I trusted completely when I should have trusted wisely. I learned that there's a difference between love and naivety, between giving someone the benefit of the doubt and ignoring reality. I learned that some people are capable of deception so elaborate and sustained that they amount to a form of emotional terrorism. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I survived the complete destruction of everything I believed about my life and my marriage. I rebuilt from nothing, and I'm genuinely happy now in a way I probably never was during those 12 years of living a lie. I still wonder sometimes what would have happened if I hadn't found out. Would they have gone through with it? Would I have died never knowing that my entire marriage was a fiction? But those are questions without answers, and I've learned to live with uncertainty. What I know for sure is that I'm alive, I'm free, and I'll never again mistake elaborate deception for love. The truth, as devastating as it was, set me free. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.